Hey there, Booksy. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to A Closer Book. This is a series where I talk about three of my recent reads. We're now up to books 85 to 87. First is How to Behave in a Crowd by Camille Bordas. This is about a French family with 6 children, and the narrator, Isidore, is the youngest. And whether because of their culture or their unconventional parents, the children are all high achievers and they both speak and are spoken to as adult peers to their mother and the man they all call the father. Since the family history is being told by its youngest member, we get a very biased perspective of the story where the narrator's views are mostly influenced by the person he's idolizing at the time. And for a big part of the novel, this influences his sister. She's older by a year and a half, but she eclipses him in terms of accomplishment. So while the narrator isn't necessarily weak, his views are easily swayed as he absorbs advice from just about everyone around him. And this shows not just who he is, but it also reflects his environment. So, How to Behave in a Crowd is almost like a self help book with the long paragraphs typical of an instructional read, as each member in Isidore's crowd shares their own ideas on what is indeed proper behavior. What I liked about this novel, the narrator clearly uses a young narrator who we can hear from, but also forgive for his part in the story. And the satire is very well expressed. There were laugh out loud moments in this book, like the sister who wants to be a famous novelist when she grows up, so she keeps records for her future biographer. And her letter exchange with her pen pal is hilarious. The book is also peppered with witty and clever comparisons between characters that show the nature of both characters in very comical ways. What I didn't like about the book, however, the way the children used foul language would just kind of leap out and shock me. I mean, the ones who cursed were older, but because the book was being narrated by Isidore, who is 11 when we meet him, it just felt inappropriate for those words to be written there. And of course, they're there because they're being said in his presence, and he's just writing what they say. Instead of improving, though, the vulgarity got progressively worse, and by around page 135, I was ready to DNF the book. But I pushed on because I wanted to give a complete review. Overall, I wouldn't recommend this for young readers. The main character is a child, but it's definitely not a book for children. The novel is almost equal parts tragedy, comedy, and drama. And while several deaths are mentioned, the tragedy is not in the loss of those characters, but in how the family members' lives go on, almost unaffected by these unfortunate events, in the description of life as they see it. So what begins as a setup for a tragedy and includes all the reads like a parody of a death is a tragic framework that receives comic reception instead, if you understand what I mean. So this achieves dramatic effect. The children are just acting and reacting and describing their lives in very emotionally distant ways, and their mother is just content to play a part that she's always wanted. Overall, the true brilliance of this book is in Bordas' explanation of this German V effect, where the audience is invited to view the performance in a kind of voyeuristic way. So instead of building intimacy with the characters, we get lost in watching them. This book was blurbed by greats like George Saunders, who won the Man Booker Prize this year. And while I don't think that this How to Behave in a Crowd is on that same level, I do see snatches of brilliance in this book, and so I'd recommend it on that regard. Again, not for young readers. Additionally, the novel discusses mental disorders and might be a trigger for anyone grappling with similar issues. Book number 86 is Thief's Mark by Carla Neggers, and it's the 7th novel in the Sharp and Donovan series. I didn't know it was part of a series when I chose to read it, and the main characters of the series are Emma Sharp and Colin Donovan, who are just married and on honeymoon in this novel. However, while they're vacationing in Ireland, close to Emma's grandfather, there's a break-in at his house, and the clues point to Oliver North, an art dealer that the grandfather has been following for a while, stretching back to some period when Oliver himself was an art thief. However, as the book progresses, we find out that Oliver is in trouble. When he was a child, his parents were murdered, and in the opening scenes of this book, one of the suspects from that case turns up on his doorstep dead. So the book is about unraveling 3 mysteries: the break-in at Emma's grandfather's house, the murder at Oliver's house, and why not solve the 30-year-old cold case of how his parents got killed while we're at it. The novel takes place over 3 countries, Ireland, England, and the United States, so it does have international appeal. Also, Oliver's disappearing acts made me think I was supposed to chase him instead of the criminals, but I enjoyed the dual roles that the author gave him. The author includes a lot of diversity in terms of character ages and background, and it was an exercise to imagine what the next characters would be like. The plot also had sufficient mystery and intrigue to be interesting, but it also interspersed art and historical references that increased its charm. And I enjoyed the way the author moved around the British Isles, so reading the story also felt like an adventure. And while the book is part of the series, it does function as a standalone book. And true, I had no idea of how some relationships came into being, but I think the author did a good job of introducing me to how the characters were now, even if I didn't know their histories. I didn't think the cover was particularly attractive, and the novel might have benefited from a prologue that explained some of the background. Instead, we had a lot of details surrounding almost every description, so there were parts of the narrative that were excessively explanatory. There were also a lot of dead characters, people who we met only through their legacy because they had died before this installment in the story began. But even in their passing, we're still influencing the characters and their decisions. Overall, however, I enjoyed reading this book. I admired the way the author kept me engaged in a story that I was coming to late, and I enjoyed the relationships and most, but not all, of the plot resolutions. And finally, book 87 is The Decameron by Giovanni Bocaccio. This is a translation by Wayne A. Rebhorn. The setting of this book is Florence around the time of the Black Plague. That's around the 1300s. There are people dying everywhere, and a group of young people decide to leave the tragic circumstances and go on a trip. So there are 10 characters, 7 women, young and busty, and 3 men, all who are in love with or are related to at least one of the women. These 10 characters plus their servants wind up in a palace, and they realize that they need a leader, so every day someone else will be the ruler and make the decisions. The first leader decides that each person should take a turn telling a story to keep the others entertained. And because of the time period that the book covers, much of the stories cover some religious topic, but mostly they poke fun at religious authority by telling tales of unscrupulous men and women who take advantage of their position in the church to commit theft and adultery and sometimes even murder. The book composes 100 stories, with each character telling a story for each of 10 days. While some of the vignettes were definitely funny and others were thought-provoking, some were just sad. But it is Boccaccio's characterizations that probably get him the most flack. His portrayal of women as weak and content to be weak, however, is probably in line with the medieval setting of the book. Spoiler alert, it could seem rather anticlimactic that the book ends with the characters returning to their home, the plague averted, and their lives returning to normal. Therefore, the focus of the book has to remain on the stories and what they tell us about life in the 1300s. From any other perspective, it might be impossible to enjoy the Decameron, especially if one is looking for waves of feminism that might be in a book set in the current age. The Decameron is not that book. And that's it. That is a closer look at these 3 recent reads. Leave me a comment down below if you've read any of these and you want to chat about them. So until tomorrow, thanks for watching this video. I know I don't sound great. I'm having a cold, but we'll talk another time when I'm feeling better. So until then, happy reading. Bye.